Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thanks for joining Softvision's Programmers Week 2021. My name is Bill Roske, and I'll be presenting to you Green is Bad, Rethinking Automation Success. A little bit about myself. I am a quality architect with Softvision. I've been in my current role for about 6 years, and I've been in quality engineering and test automation since 1984. I'll let you do that math. Just as a slight side note, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll pick them up when time permits. I will certainly be leaving some time at the end of the presentation to cover questions. So the topic of this conversation is around this question that we hear a lot: when will testing be green, right? And we have to think about whether this is a good question or not. And to start with, we need to think about who's asking and why are they asking? Are they looking for project status, for permission, if you will, for deploying to the next environment, or are we ready to release? And then the next question is, what does this mean to them? What does testing and regression testing in particular, being green, mean to them? To some of us, it means all tests are passing. The question is, are bugs filed when tests are failing? And then are all bugs always closed before we release? Or are they always closed before project status? I actually had this question come to me numerous times in my career. And I remember one particular time a director asked me, I was leading a group of testers on an agile project. And he said, when are the tests going to be green? And I said, when you fix all of the bugs. And that kind of got him thinking, because we had a backlog of 150 open bugs, and the plan wasn't to produce software that was completely bug-free. It wasn't necessary. And that leads us to, do we as testers have control over this metric of regression tests being green? And so we have to think about what does it mean from our perspective? How do we make testing green? So if we think about current tools, excuse me, current tools aggregate our regression results, right? Green means all tests are passing, right? Bugs are a completely separate item to look at. What does management really want to know? They really want to know, are we able to move forward to the next environment, to a UAT environment or to a release? So the question becomes, is green realistic, right? Think about that second point up there. We have open bugs. We would hope that we have tests that are illustrating those bugs. So if we're not going to close all the bugs, but we want the testing status to be green, what does that mean? So what is the point specifically of regression testing, right? Regression testing tells us the relative quality of the software. Failure is not a bad thing. It just tells us we have these known issues. And usually we look at failure rates over time. If you were in the previous presentation by my friend Ekta, she talked about looking at the failures, but also looking at what's the priority of those tests and do we need to fix them, right? If they're a lower risk to having that failing functionality, then there isn't a problem, except that our regression tests are not going to be green. So setting that expectation that, oh, we've got to be green, that tells us we can release, is a little bit too binary, right? In test automation, we try to make regression testing efficient, and so that we can run over and over again. So we need to be looking at those failure rates over time. And if we look at the probability of failure, the probability of a failure is going to go up if you improve your coverage, right? If you're adding test cases to your suite, the probability that you're going to have a failure is going to go up. Maybe not significantly, but it does change. If the product under test changes, your probability of finding a failure goes up. If you have existing known failures, right, your probability of having a failure in a regression result is 100, right? So we have to be careful. How are the regression tests actually being used, and how does that create this particular problem, right? So let's talk about that. As a quality engineer, how do I use regression results, right? I look at what failed and why, right? I want evidence of the failure or pass. If some of you may be working on defense projects or medical devices, your regression tests as you get close to the end of the failure, and quite honestly, if you're in that space, green probably is a good thing, right? So that may be a spot where green's not so bad, but you still need evidence of pass or failure. And quite honestly, all of us want the evidence of failure. I don't want to have an automated test that I then have to rerun automated or manually to figure out what actually happened. I want the test to tell me exactly what happened, right? We also want to know what's new versus known failures. Has somebody already filed a bug for a failure? One of the things that throughout my career we've struggled with within the testing space is this connection between failures and known failures, or new failures and known failures. I worked on a project where I actually do another talk about this, about how in agile projects, we tend to focus on stories. So we write test cases for each individual story. And I worked on an agile project where from the beginning, we said, automated test for every story, no exceptions, boom, right? We ended up over a year greenfield development of this product, ended up with thousands of test cases, right? If we had we had more like 200,000 test cases, a little over 200,000 test cases. If we had a 90% pass rate, we had 20,000 failures. We needed that connection to open bugs to know, is this a new failure or is this a known failure? So what do developers, and we're going to come back to that in a little bit, what do developers look for, right? When they see regression tests, they want to know, what did I break, right? So they want to know, was this a known failure? Was this something that I created? And last but not least, management asks the question, are we green? Is everything passing? And they'll get the question, when will it be green? I suggest they should be asking the question, is quality improving, right? I was at a presentation about 3 years ago where a keynote speaker was talking about her experience taking over an organization. And the first question she was asked is, when are you going to get the automated tests green? And her whole presentation was about the different things that she did to help drive the automated results to green. And it was at that time that when she started talking about that, my first thought was, you're asking the wrong question, right? If those are valid failures, why would you try to drive to green? And it turns out that there may be some problems with doing that. So the question is, should green actually be the goal? So when we talk about software and software quality, which is what testing and quality engineering is all about, we have to understand that software is rarely bug-free. My first iteration of this talk is never bug-free, and I understand you can't say that. I've worked on medical devices. I've worked on navigational and fire control systems. And yeah, in those, you really don't release with bugs, right? Certainly not anything of consequence. So, but in most commercial software, not all the bugs will be fixed before release, right? Some of them are cosmetics, right? Some will have workarounds. Sometimes there's a risk to taking a fix late in a release that is a higher risk than the risk of releasing with that bug. back again to the previous talk, Ekta's talk on risk-based testing, right? What's the risk of this failure versus the risk of the change? And there's also the opportunity cost, right? If you're days away from a major show where you're going to show off a product and you have some changes, you have to mitigate all of the workarounds, the risk and the opportunity cost. If you say, we can't release, well, what does that cost the organization, right? So for all of this, we need failing tests need to be equated with open bugs. Well, if that's the case, failing tests mean red. If you use any tool to report your results, if they see failures, they will tell you your tests are red, right? So how do we get to green? And I go back to a metric mantra that I learned back when I had probability and statistics. And that metric mantra was beware the path of least resistance. People will do whatever is easiest to do to get you to green. So what are our options to get to green? Well, we can fix the bugs, right? Or we could go in and we could adjust the test so that it passes with the known failure data, right? Well, we're getting the wrong data back, but we've opened a bug and there's a drive to get to green. So let's just modify the test so it passes, right? And you may do that to change expectations, or you might just comment out that part of the test, right? I think we would all agree that that's a less desirable approach than fixing the bugs, but it's also, in some cases, easier. Even easier is, let's just turn off the failing tests and poof, we're green. And there are a lot of organizations that do this, right? They have tests that fail and they know about the failure and they make the determination that, you know what, we're going to go ahead and release with that failure. And in order to get the test cases to be green, because someone has a check mark that says, well, in order to release, the test results have to be green, right? So let's turn off the failing tests. Well, let's dig a little deeper into why that's a bad idea, right? There are organizations who will argue, well, that makes complete sense. Why would we test something we know is failing when we know we're not going to fix it? But there's actually a deeper problem with that. And let's take a look at that. So one thing we learn is that test cases should fail for one and only one reason. When you look at JUnit, NUnit, XUnit, MSUnit, any other test framework or tool for even manual testing, many of them will allow you to identify steps and you can put pass fail on those steps. But when you do a report of here's the status of testing, if you had one step that failed in a test case, that test case is a failure, right? So pass means everything worked as expected. Failure means something did not work as expected. It could have been behavior. It could have been post conditions. What if the state of, what is the state of a test case if you have a problem during some preliminary steps or preconditions, right? If you have a UI test and you're unable to log in, well, you haven't tested the functionality you were trying to get to because of a different issue you couldn't log in, right? Or what if just one other step or post condition failed? Or if there's a failure after everything else, you try to clean up after yourself and that fails. So is that pass or fail? Some tools have something called inconclusive. So Microsoft Tests and their ADO platform, I know they don't call it that, but their DevOps testing platform, they have a inconclusive state that you can force set on a test case. Ooh, what color is that? Things to think about. So I want to back up a little bit and think a little bit more about test cases, and why, when we're talking as quality engineers about test cases, we're talking about functional tests. And what are the attributes of a test case and that need to be supported by a framework? And what does it mean to pass or fail, right? So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We're all quality engineers, so we know most of this stuff, right? But every test case has preconditions. What data needs to be set up? What application state needs to be there before we can actually test the functionality under test for this particular test case, right? And then we have behavioral expectations. What are the interactions with the application that we're testing? If the behavior, if the test case is for the behavior of an API, usually these behavioral expectations are, when I produce this input, I get a status 200 or a status 400 or 404 or whatever your expectation is of the behavior. But then you have post conditions. Okay, I got that response, right? I should back up. If your behavior expectations are on a user interface, you may have more steps that you're interacting with multiple pieces of the application. So what are those behaviors? And then what are the post conditions? How is the data changed? How is the application state changed? If it's a UI, what does the view look like? What is changed on the screen? And then you expect the test case to be able to give you a result. Everything worked, everything didn't, right? And we're back to that everything again. And we also want them to be independent, right? We don't want to cascade test cases. You don't want the result of one test case to be the input of another test case, because if that test case fails, you can't get to the next one, right? So other things, you want tests to be self-contained. All that information should be in the test case. Self-cleaning or self-checking. Make sure they can figure out what is pass-fail. Especially in an automated test for regression testing, you want no human interpretation, right? You want the test itself to make the determination. Is it a pass or fail? Clean up after themselves, right? And then make sure that they are able to report to a repository of some sort and correlate to that software under test. This is a list of attributes that I've collected over the years from folks like Boris Beiser, Ken Beck, Ken Kainer, pick your testing expert. Most agree these are the at least the base set of attributes. Right? So given that discussion, do we really have one reason for failure? To drive this home, I'd like to take a quick detour into a fictitious application. Let's say we have an application that has a customer summary page, right? It's a e-commerce page, maybe something like Amazon, or pick your favorite shopping site. Let's say we have a customer summary page that has contact information, maybe a little map of my location. So as a customer, I know they're going to the right location. A balance of accounts. Let's say I may be able to have credits, so I might have an account balance. A current order list with the state of delivery, right? So here are your current open orders and where are they at in delivery, and then here's your history. And let's say that page, if we're going to test that page, makes 5 direct API calls. Probably some unknown non-zero number of indirect service calls, right? To pick up each of these 5 pieces of information. Right? So how many test cases would you have for this page? Think about that for a minute in your mind. How many test cases would you expect? You've got multiple things you're checking. However, UIs are expensive, right? For APIs, you press each one of these APIs individually, right? But if you're doing a UI test to see that it all integrates properly together, you really probably want to have one test case that navigates to this page and then validates the behavior of the page, the content of the page, right? Because those UI tests are expensive in time and execution, right? So remember that UI tests require that login and navigation to get there. It's not just the setup. If you're using something like a grid with Selenium, you've got the cost of spinning up browser, the cost of then logging in and navigating to the page just to get to the test. If you did a separate test case for each one of those pieces of the page, you would be wasting an awful lot of time setting up exactly the same conditions, right? So make the most of that journey. So let's say we do that, right? And we have a UI test that logs in, navigates to that page, and now we're going to check those results. So what if? What if on day one, that contact information is wrong? It's a new failure, so we file a bug, right? So now we have a test case that failed, and on some future date, the delivery status is not populated, okay? But the day one bug is still open. So this is not a new failure. We wrote one test case to go to this page and then validate those 5 different pieces of information. On day one, we had a failure in contact. On day 1 plus some other, let's say day 2, now we have a delivery status failure, right? Would you look at that failure? You have a test case that failed yesterday and you filed a bug. Would you look at the test case today? If yes, this implies that you will still look at every failure, even though you have an open bug for it. If not, if you say, well, this test case failed yesterday, it's failing today, I don't need to look at it. Well, the problem is you're ignoring an unknown failure, which is in the same test case. But remember, test cases are what the tools will report on, right? So what if we just turned off that test on day one? We'd be green. We wouldn't even know that there was a failure. We wouldn't even have results to look at, right? We solved the problem for the metric, which is, hey, the tests are green. But now we hid from ourselves any evidence that there is a failure. This is why turning off functional test cases, if we're writing good, efficient, automated test cases, turning them off is a really bad idea, right? So what do we do about this, right? So here's my proposal. First of all, we need a new target. Let's call it gold. Gold is the new green, sort of in the genre of orange is the new black, if you've seen that show on streaming television. But gold is the new green, right? And here's how we define this gold metric, if you will. First of all, I mentioned earlier inconclusive results. With inconclusive results, this is where we had a problem in setup. We couldn't get to the functionality we really wanted to test, right? That's not a failure. So we don't want to say a test is a failure because we couldn't get to the software under test. That's not right, right? So we want to have inconclusive as a possible result, but we don't want to have any of those reported, right? That implies there's another bug somewhere else in the system that's preventing us from testing the functionality. If we took the time to write a test, we don't want to lose that functionality, right? Also, all failed test results are associated with open bugs, right? So if we have failures that are not associated with an open bug, we're no longer gold, we're red, okay? Now, if all open bugs have been triaged by our product owner, and there are no open bugs prioritized to be fixed in this release. So this is our gold metric. Nothing inconclusive. We've left nothing untouched. All of the failed test results are associated with open bugs. There's no unknowns. And all those open bugs have been triaged. So we've already made a determination that there are no bugs to be fixed before release. We've looked at all of the bugs. This is gold. It can't be green because we do have failures, right? And we need to have that conversation, right? It can't be the check mark, oh, it's green, okay, let's ignore it, right? Because we can't ignore even a gold result, right? We still have to make sure that this conversation is happening with our product owners. But we need framework and test case management support for this idea. We need support for something called non-binary test results, right? I have tests that may be pass, they may be fail, or they may be inconclusive. In addition, and I submit, and you'll notice that I say non-binary test results, not non-binary test cases. The reason I say that is because we need multiple non-binary results per test case. We need something I like to call soft asserts. So there's another talk during Programmers Week, I believe it's this afternoon, about JMax, which is the Java Magenic Automation Quick Start testing framework. And we've implemented something called soft asserts. We all know what asserts are, right? In a test case, you assert something is true. If it's false, end of test, you fail, right? And that comes from the unit test framework. The problem with that is, let's go back to that example I was talking about. If the first thing you check is the contact and it fails and you bail out of the test, no, that's not how we want functional tests to work, right? We want to record that failure, but continue on, right? So we need the test case management systems and the frameworks to allow us to have multiple pass-fail results within a single, what they call test case. So the test case can still be independent. However, we want to be able to report at the step level or at a verification point, what we call soft assert point, rather than just at the test case level. Most test case management systems do not have this capability. They have the ability to record pass-fail at a step, but not to report at that. And we need that full result for that, or full support for that. We also need support for inconclusive results, right? We need to be able to report, here are the passes, here are the fails, here are the, we don't know, right? Some reporting mechanisms do have this in the form of to-do. I know X-Ray has, which is a plugin for Jira, has this concept of the test case is to do. We didn't get a pass or fail result from the test case, so we're leaving it in to do, right? But not all frameworks have that capability. And then, of course, we need to have combined metrics. We not only need to report at the test case level, but I need, for failures, I need what are the related defects to those failures. So when I'm looking at the list of results for me in the morning, I can sort them, hopefully, by here are all the failures that I'm responsible for out of the regression suite last night. But here are the ones you have open failures, open defects for. Again, these being soft asserts, not the whole test case. And here are the ones you don't know about. So if we go back to that example, on day 2, when that second failure happened, it would show up as a new failure because it's a separate test point out of the test case, but it's a separate pass-fail result, and there's no defect assigned to that particular result. So that's the proposal. So the conclusion, driving for green regression testing is a bad idea, okay? Quality state is a conversation. It is not the result of some binary function, right? The state of the quality of the software has to do with that list of the gold metric, right? We need that gold metric to talk about what is the current state of quality. It's not just thumbs up, thumbs down, right? It is, okay, we have failures. We acknowledge we have failures. Here's the status of those failures and what we plan to do about them, right? And if we have that conversation, if we have that information, that helps us understand the whole quality state for the software. We need test reporting tools. They're getting better, but a little revolution is necessary, right? We do need to change the frameworks first, right? If we have reporting mechanisms that can report on steps, but we don't have any frameworks for test automation that allow us to report results at a step level, we're not going to get the tool vendors to do that, right? I will say, I did speak with one of the tool vendors who was at Spirea. They have their Spira test. And one of the things I like, I don't work for them. I don't get any kickback from them. But one of the things, I was at one of the test conferences, and they were presenting their test reporting mechanism, and they had links between test cases and defects. And I said, could you put that on the main screen when I'm looking at all of the test cases? I want to know if there's an open defect for that failure. And they said, well, yeah, you can just click here and then click there. And I said, okay, you have to understand, I might have 20,000 of these to do in a day. I really need to know at a glance. They went, oh yeah, we could add that. Their next release 2 months later had that in their hosted environment, had that functionality. It was just a little red check mark that said you have a test case, or you have a failure, or a defect, or you don't for that failure. So that was, there's progress. That's why I say it's a little revolution, but we have to enhance the frameworks to allow us to do that. We also need to throw the elephant. I recommend that book if you haven't read it. We need to manage management's expectations and basically say, stop asking me when the tests are going to be green. You are encouraging bad behaviors. Go back to that, hey, let's just turn off the tests that fail, and then we don't have to worry about it. Management will stop asking, right? That's a bad thing. So we need to manage management's expectations of what the results really mean, and tools that allow us to give us that the results are gold. And if the results are gold, we're good. If they're red, something's not good, right? So green can be bad, right? Again, I used to say green is bad, but as I mentioned before, there are sometimes you do try to release software that is bug-free as far as you know, right? But if you've ever used a Windows laptop or an Android phone or an iPhone, you know that nothing is released bug-free, or we wouldn't have updates coming to our devices on a regular basis, right? So green can be bad, and maybe gold is the new